Carl Jung's lifelong exploration into the depths of human psychology revealed that among the billions of human beings alive, only a small fraction display what he called differentiated consciousness, a capacity for awareness so advanced that it separates them from the rest of humanity like a rare species of mind hidden in plain sight. Most people go through life repeating cultural scripts, identifying with roles assigned by family or society, rarely questioning why they do what they do, but Jung noticed that some individuals simply could not function this way. Their nervous systems rejected superficiality, their hearts rejected shallow connections, their intellects rejected recycled answers. These were not signs of weakness as they had often been told, but evidence of what Jung considered the frontier of human evolution. Now, let's pause here. Why is this important? Because many of us who resonate with Jung's description spent decades feeling defective, as though being too sensitive, too intense, or too questioning makes us flawed. But Jung argued the opposite. These so-called flaws are actually the blueprint for humanity's next step in psychological development. And when we think about it, history provides endless evidence. Every great innovator, from the mystics who challenged religious orthodoxy to the scientists who revolutionized knowledge, carried this burden of not fitting into the ordinary. They felt reality more vividly, saw its inconsistencies more sharply, and refused to settle for answers designed only to maintain comfort. In this way, psychological rarity is not a luxury, it is a responsibility. If you are part of this small percentage, Jung would say you were born with a different operating system, one designed not to blend in but to move consciousness forward. What makes this journey complicated is that society resists those who embody it. Jung's case studies showed that many gifted individuals were pathologized, they were told they were too much, they were medicated, dismissed, or pressured to conform. Imagine being born with heightened sensitivity in a world that glorifies numbness, or carrying profound emotional depth in a culture that rewards distraction. You would, understandably, internalize the message that something was wrong with you. But Jung reframed this suffering. What feels like alienation is actually evidence of advancement. From a purely evolutionary perspective, humanity has always relied on outliers to break stagnant patterns. If we look at how species adapt, it is never through the majority clinging to old behaviors but through a few rare individuals experimenting with new ones. In the same way, rare psychological types are those who cannot help but push against conformity, and their resistance becomes the seedbed of transformation for everyone else. This is why Jung considered the integration of such personalities not just a matter of individual mental health but a contribution to collective progress. To grasp this, we must understand what differentiated consciousness really means. For Jung, it was the process of moving from unconscious identification with collective norms toward conscious individuation, the ability to define oneself in alignment with inner truth rather than external expectation. But individuation is not just about being unique, it is about being whole. And wholeness demands confrontation with the shadow, with all the disowned aspects of ourselves we would rather keep hidden. This is where the journey of rare personalities becomes both dangerous and sacred. Because to access advanced levels of consciousness, one must not bypass pain but descend into it, allowing disillusionment, suffering, and solitude to strip away what is false. That descent often resembles what alchemists called nigredo, the blackening, a phase where the old self collapses. Here's where my analysis adds another layer. Jung's model aligns strikingly with what modern neuroscience is revealing about sensitivity and depth. Researchers like Dr. Elaine Aron have shown that highly sensitive people process information in more complex ways, detecting subtleties others miss. But Jung's insight extended beyond sensitivity into something much rarer: the ability to metabolize life at levels that are qualitatively different, not just quantitatively heightened. It is like the difference between a camera with higher resolution and an entirely new kind of lens. This explains why many advanced personalities not only feel more but also translate those feelings into visions, patterns, and archetypal insights that resonate with universal human truths. Think of this as psychological architecture operating on multiple floors while most people remain confined to the ground level. This multilayered perception explains both the brilliance and the suffering of rare individuals. On one hand, they perceive the symbolic dimensions of existence, seeing in personal struggles the reflection of collective dramas, finding in dreams a language of transformation, interpreting daily conflicts as opportunities for growth. On the other hand, they are often overwhelmed by this complexity, unable to simplify their inner world enough to communicate easily with others. This paradox leads to the loneliness Jung described so poignantly. To be advanced in consciousness often means to be misunderstood by those still operating within simpler frameworks. But instead of seeing this as a tragic curse, we can reinterpret it as a calling. When you feel that the world cannot hold your intensity, it is not proof that you are broken but a reminder that you are carrying potential that exceeds the current capacity of the collective. You are not too much, the world is too little, as Jung might put it. And here lies a crucial shift of perspective. The task of rare personalities is not to dilute themselves for comfort but to embody their depth strategically so it can seed transformation in ways others can eventually receive. Let us take the example of emotional depth, which Jung considered one of the most misunderstood qualities. Society calls it oversensitivity, but Jung reframed it as sophistication. What looks like volatility is actually the psyche resonating at multiple levels simultaneously, much like a complex chord in music rather than a simple note. If you are wired this way, your challenge is not to suppress emotion but to learn how to conduct it, as a maestro does with an orchestra. This requires discipline, discernment, and a willingness to suffer misunderstanding. But once harnessed, emotional sophistication becomes one of the most powerful tools for empathy, creativity, and transformation that humanity has. Jung once wrote that everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. For the rare personality, this is amplified. Every encounter, every disappointment, every joy is raw material for inner alchemy. Nothing is wasted. Every moment can reveal layers of meaning invisible to those less attuned. And yet, here is where caution is necessary. Jung warned about what he called psychological inflation, the danger of mistaking rarity for superiority. If you are rare, your gift is not proof that you are better than others, but that you have a responsibility to embody your nature without arrogance. You are not here to dominate but to illuminate. The fact that you see deeper does not make others less valuable, it simply means they walk a different path. Jung's great insight was that evolution is collective, and the rare must serve as bridges rather than isolating themselves in towers of superiority. In practice, this means cultivating both humility and strength, learning to discern when to speak and when to remain silent, when to challenge and when to nurture. It means remembering that even the most advanced individuals carry shadows that must be integrated, otherwise their gifts can become prisons. Consider how many visionaries have collapsed into isolation, addiction, or despair because they could not reconcile their depth with society's inability to understand them. Jung would remind us that individuation is never finished, that the rarest among us are not exempt from the universal human struggle but simply live it more intensely. To carry this awareness is to walk a razor's edge. Too much withdrawal and your gift dies unshared, too much exposure and your gift is consumed. True mastery lies in dancing between these poles, grounded in your authenticity while still connected to the collective. And that is why the rare personality is not a mistake of nature but its experiment, its way of testing new possibilities for what human beings can become. If you resonate with this description, consider the possibility that your suffering has meaning not just for you but for the evolution of consciousness itself. You are both the laboratory and the experiment, both the question and the answer. And though the world may never fully recognize the magnitude of what you carry, the truth is that your existence is evidence that humanity is capable of more than it currently expresses. That, ultimately, is the essence of Jung's insight into psychological rarity. You are not broken, you are breakthrough. If part 1 revealed the rarity of advanced consciousness, part 2 must explore the crucible in which it is forged. Carl Jung insisted that individuation, the process of becoming whole, cannot happen without suffering. He wrote that there is no coming to consciousness without pain, and if we sit with that statement, we realize how radical it truly is. In a society addicted to comfort, convenience, and quick fixes, Jung's insight confronts us with the uncomfortable truth: depth cannot be accessed cheaply. It requires collapse, confrontation, and the willingness to endure a kind of psychic death. And here's where rare personalities often struggle most, because their nervous systems are already tuned to higher sensitivity. Their initiation into individuation tends to be harsher, darker, and longer than average. It is almost as if life conspires to strip them bare until they have no choice but to face the hidden architecture of their souls. But let's step back and ask, why must suffering be the gatekeeper? Jung's answer lay in the shadow. Every human being, no matter how kind, intelligent, or spiritual, carries within them an opposite self, a repository of impulses, desires, fears, and potentials that the ego represses in order to maintain stability. The average person never looks deeply into this shadow, preferring distraction and denial. But the rare individual, gifted with sharper perception, cannot escape it. Their awareness drags them into confrontation with contradictions others manage to avoid. They notice their envy even when they try to love, their rage even when they aim to be peaceful, their selfishness even when they sacrifice. At first, this realization feels unbearable, and many advanced personalities fall into despair, believing they are uniquely flawed. Yet Jung taught that this confrontation is not evidence of corruption but of readiness. To see one's shadow clearly is a privilege, because it means you have begun the work of integration, the essential step in becoming whole. Imagine a person raised to believe they must always be kind, agreeable, and selfless. Their ego clings to this identity, but beneath it burns suppressed anger, resentment, and the desire for power. If they refuse to face this shadow, it leaks out in passive aggression, manipulation, or illness. But if they bravely confront it, acknowledge it, and integrate it, they gain not only honesty but vitality. This is the alchemical secret: the gold is hidden in the darkness. Jung loved the symbol of the Ouroboros, the serpent eating its own tail, because it represents this paradox: life consumes itself in order to renew itself. Rare personalities, who often feel devoured by their own intensity, must realize they are living embodiments of the Ouroboros. Their collapse is not the end, it is the beginning of transformation. And this brings us to another essential concept: synchronicity. Jung observed that when a person truly begins to engage with their inner work, the outer world seems to respond in mysterious ways. Meaningful coincidences occur, dreams align with events, and symbols appear in daily life as if orchestrated by an unseen intelligence. Skeptics dismiss synchronicity as chance, but Jung believed it revealed the psyche's participation in a deeper order of reality. For rare individuals, these experiences are not just curiosities, they are lifelines. When you feel isolated, misunderstood, or shattered by shadow work, synchronicities remind you that you are not lost in chaos but guided by a pattern larger than you can see. The universe itself seems to whisper, "Continue. You are on the path." Let me add something here: in modern psychology, we might call this an attunement to patterns of meaning, a heightened ability to detect connections others overlook. But Jung would say this is not just a psychological quirk, it is metaphysical evidence of the interconnectedness of psyche and cosmos. For the advanced personality, synchronicity is both proof and encouragement, a confirmation that individuation is not just a personal project but a cosmic collaboration. Still, we must not romanticize this journey. Jung made it clear that individuation is not blissful but dangerous. Many who begin the descent into their depths are overwhelmed by it, unable to return. He compared it to an initiation rite: those who survive are reborn with greater wholeness, but those who resist or deny may collapse into neurosis, addiction, or despair. This is why he emphasized the necessity of guidance, whether through therapy, community, or symbolic systems like mythology and religion. The rare individual is often tempted to believe they can do it alone, but the truth is that no one individuates in isolation. Even Jung himself relied on alchemy, dreams, and the symbolic language of myths as companions on the path. Consider the myth of Persephone, abducted into the underworld. To modern eyes, it is simply a story, but Jung would read it as a psychological map. Persephone represents the ego confronted with shadow and death, forced to integrate what lies beneath. Her return to the surface each spring symbolizes the rebirth that follows descent. Rare personalities often live this myth directly. They are pulled into underworlds of depression, disillusionment, or loss, only to emerge with new depth. But the key is acceptance. To resist the descent is to prolong suffering, to embrace it is to accelerate transformation. And what does this transformation look like? Jung called it individuation, but we might describe it as the flowering of authenticity. The person no longer identifies solely with their social persona or their ego's illusions, but integrates their shadow, their inner child, their anima or animus, and even their transpersonal connection to archetypal forces. They begin to live from a center deeper than personality, what Jung sometimes called the self, the organizing principle of the psyche. In practice, this does not make life easier, but it makes it meaningful. The rare individual who individuates becomes like a tuning fork, resonating with both personal truth and collective archetypes. Their very presence influences others, not through preaching but through authenticity. Here is where we return to responsibility. Jung emphasized that individuation is not for oneself alone but for the collective. The insights and integrations you achieve ripple outward, inspiring others unconsciously. This is why the suffering of the rare is not wasted. Every tear, every sleepless night, every confrontation with shadow contributes to a larger transformation of human consciousness. You may not see the impact, but Jung would assure you it exists. At this point, let me step aside to offer a modern perspective. Neuroscience shows that when one person regulates their nervous system, it affects those around them through mirror neurons and co-regulation. Jung, without this science, intuited the same truth that individuation radiates outward. So when you heal, you help heal the collective. When you confront your shadow, you make it easier for others to face theirs. This is why the rare personality's path, though painful, is profoundly significant. And yet, we must remember humility. Jung warned that contact with the archetypal realm can inflate the ego, making one feel like a prophet or savior. This is a deadly trap. The true individuated individual does not boast of being advanced but lives quietly, authentically, allowing their being to speak louder than words. They know that the self, not the ego, is the true center. And so they walk humbly, aware of their fragility, but also strong in their rootedness. So part 2 ends with this paradox: the rare personality is both broken and whole, wounded and healer, outsider and bridge. Their suffering is not punishment but initiation. Their task is not to escape shadow but to integrate it, not to avoid collapse but to allow it to reshape them. And if you recognize yourself in these words, perhaps you are already in the underworld, wondering if there is light ahead. Jung's answer is yes. The light is not at the end of the tunnel, it is in the very darkness you fear. Integration is the fire that burns away illusion, leaving only essence. And essence, once discovered, is indestructible. When Carl Jung studied individuals who stood apart from the ordinary patterns of life, he was not simply documenting curiosity cases, he was outlining what he believed were the prototypes of humanity's future. The rarest personalities, those with differentiated consciousness, were not fragile anomalies but carriers of psychological evolution. Yet Jung also understood a dangerous paradox: the very qualities that made these individuals powerful could also destroy them if left unintegrated. To grasp this, we must explore what it means to live with advanced psychological architecture in a world built for surface living. Jung observed that rare individuals often attract 3 types of relationships: the seekers who are drawn to their light, the dimmers who attempt to suppress it, and the matchers who can meet them in authenticity. This dynamic is not merely social but archetypal. The seekers unconsciously want the rare person to play healer or savior, giving them meaning without doing their own inner work. The dimmers feel threatened by the depth because it exposes their own unacknowledged shallowness. And the matchers are scarce but essential allies, those who have done their own shadow work and can therefore engage without consuming or diminishing. From my perspective, This triad explains why many rare individuals feel perpetually misunderstood, because the majority of encounters are either exploitative or repressive, leaving them with few true equals. Jung would say that this is the cost of individuation. Once you become whole, you no longer fit neatly into the roles society hands out. But he also warned against inflation, the temptation to confuse rarity with superiority. Here lies the shadow side of rarity, which manifests in three forms. The superiority complex, believing oneself above others simply because one sees more deeply. The messianic complex, assuming responsibility for awakening or saving everyone around. And the martyrdom complex, resigning oneself to endless suffering as if pain is the inevitable price of depth. Each of these is a distortion of truth, and Jung's remedy was shadow integration, making conscious the hidden drives behind these tendencies so that the rare individual can live responsibly rather than destructively. When we think about this in modern terms, it's striking how often gifted, sensitive, or visionary people fall into one of these traps. The young intellectual who looks down on the average person, blind to the arrogance eating away at his soul. The empathy who burns herself out by endlessly carrying others' emotional burdens. The seeker who romanticizes suffering and mistakes it for purpose. Jung would remind us that psychological gifts are not for self-glorification but for service to the collective. This service does not mean martyrdom, nor does it mean playing savior. It means living authentically enough that others are invited, but not forced, to do the same. There's a humility in this that our culture often forgets. True power is quiet, steady, and rooted, not loud or self-congratulatory. When Jung spoke of individuation, he envisioned a person who could stand in the fullness of their uniqueness without needing validation, domination, or endless sacrifice. And yet, the rare individual carries a special responsibility, because their very existence unsettles the unconscious norms of society. Each refusal to conform, each insistence on meaning over shallow comfort, each act of radical authenticity becomes a ripple that others cannot ignore. Think of the historical figures who embodied this: Socrates insisting on asking questions until Athens silenced him, or Simone Weil refusing to compromise her moral clarity even at the cost of her health, or modern visionaries who disrupt industries and awaken new ways of being. What they share is not superiority, but responsibility. They carried truths that made others uncomfortable, but necessary. Jung believed this is how consciousness evolves, not through the mass, but through individuals at the edges who embody new possibilities. From this perspective, your sensitivity, intensity, and refusal to settle are not private quirks, they are evolutionary signals. But to carry them responsibly, you must learn discernment. Not everyone deserves access to your depth. Not every battle is yours to fight. Not every cry for help is yours to answer. This is where many stumble, confusing compassion with compulsion, or mistaking their rarity as permission to withdraw into elitism. Jung would caution both extremes: do not let arrogance isolate you, and do not let self-sacrifice consume you. Instead, live from wholeness, which means giving when it is authentic, withdrawing when it is necessary, and always remembering that your worth is not defined by how others respond. In this way, your life becomes less about convincing and more about embodying. And embodiment is magnetic. Jung observed that when a rare person truly accepts their own nature, they begin to attract others who are ready to awaken themselves. The goal is not to be understood by everyone, but to resonate with the few who share your frequency. This is what makes psychological rarity bearable: finding your matchers. Even one or two such connections can be enough to sustain a lifetime of authenticity. And beyond relationships, Jung saw rarity as a role within the broader arc of human evolution. The differentiated individual is a bridge between the unconscious and conscious, a living laboratory where humanity experiments with new forms of perception, meaning, and identity. When you insist on authenticity, you show others what authenticity looks like. When you refuse shallow answers, you challenge others to question their own. When you live aligned with inner purpose, you expand what seems possible for human life. In this way, you are not merely surviving, you are pioneering. Of course, this road is lonely. Jung never romanticized it. He acknowledged that to individuate is to walk away from herd comforts, to risk misunderstanding, rejection, and solitude. But he also believed the reward was incomparable, the privilege of a lifetime, to become who you truly are. And for rare personalities, becoming who you truly are is not indulgence, it is obligation. Humanity's evolution depends on it. To carry this responsibility means to cultivate resilience, the capacity to withstand being misunderstood without collapsing, to endure loneliness without bitterness, to face the weight of awareness without becoming cynical. And it also means cultivating joy, the overlooked medicine for depth. Too often rare individuals slip into brooding seriousness, forgetting that laughter, play, and beauty are not betrayals of depth but expressions of wholeness. Jung himself, despite his grave insights, enjoyed art, mythology, and even playful imagination. To be rare is not to be forever heavy, it is to be fully human, which includes lightness. So where does this leave us? With an invitation: if you recognize yourself in these descriptions, stop apologizing for being rare, but also stop weaponizing it against others. Accept the responsibility without arrogance, the depth without despair, the power without compulsion. Become what Jung saw in the rarest of individuals, a vessel for the next stage of human consciousness, one who lives not to escape society, nor to dominate it, but to evolve it. And remember, as Jung said, the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. If you can do that, then your rarity ceases to be a burden or a boast. It becomes a gift for the world, a living bridge to what humanity can yet become.